right here we have Roy Norris from Dakota Collegiate in Laurel School Division. Beside him, we have Martin Igembi and Tanis Bear. Did I get it right?
Close enough.
And they are from Manitoba Collegiate Roy Norris School Division. And then to the farthest left, we have Andy McKeel and Darren Kuropatwa, and they are from St. James, Assiniboia, so St. James School Division. And yeah, so, sorry.
All right. So I would first like to call up the Dean of the Faculty of Education, Dr. Heather Duncan, to say a few words.
Thank you, Elizabeth. Well, thank you, Elizabeth and Jordana, for chairing this event for MCN. It's really good that we have students so involved. Thank you too to our panelists, 3 people from Winnipeg and 2 from Minnesota. These are my old colleagues. In Liver School So colleagues from 10 years ago, at least, maybe 12 years ago. So it's really good to have them here with us. I think we've never lived in more exciting times. Technology is advancing so rapidly, and with it is our ability to use it in ways to engage our students meaningfully. And these people are actually doing that in the classrooms of our schools here in Manitoba. So I'm not going to talk for much longer. I really wish I could stay. I've got a Senate meeting, these boring meetings. But I hope you have a very interesting and informative afternoon. And thank you to Mike for organising this. I hope this is the first forum of many, because the more we can connect with our partners in the school divisions, the better. Because we're all in it for students and helping them learn. So I wish you a very informative afternoon.
Thank you very much, Dr. Duncan, for those kind words of welcome to everyone.
Okay, so I'm just going to give you a brief overview of what's going to happen. All the panelists are going to have 15 minutes each to describe their approach on one-to-one computing and how they feel about it. They'll sort of go through that, and then after the presentations, there's going to be a short refreshment break, and then that will be followed by a question and answer session. So if you have any questions throughout, just make sure you're writing them down and keeping track of them. And first up, I'd like to call on Roy Norris.
Well, I'm a high school English teacher, and as soon as I get this computer up and running, of course it's going to restart this computer that I borrowed. Don't you love when it does that? We'll see if we can't get you up and running with some slides. Not that I need them. I could probably chit-chat about this stuff without them, but I'd like to try and do this. I have to tell you about Dakota Collegiate and what we've been doing in the Laurel School Division in 15 minutes, and it's a 5-year process. So 5 years, 15 minutes. So if you can try and remember the 5 fingers on your hand, we're talking about 09, 10 school years, right? 9, 10, 10, 11, 11, 12, 12, 13, 13, 14. So it's going to go kind of fast. So I want to try and make sure you've got something really, really quick to try and remember. And it's 5 years, 15 minutes, here we go. So 5 years ago, I get an email from my boss, hey, you want to be on a committee? Yeah, sounds good. What are we going to do? We're going to have computers, and we're going to do lots with computers. So what does that mean? Well, I don't know, but let's figure it out. So that's 5 years ago, and we've come quite a way since then. And at Dakota, everyone has a computer. Everyone has their computer all the time. Well, almost everybody. It's not the grade 12s yet, because that's coming up yet. We've rolled that out a bit at a time. And it's not those kids that forget them at home, or that sort of thing, like any other school supply. So there are some kids that don't bring, but there are a lot to do. Now, maybe you don't know Dakota Collegiate, so here's a little bit about who we are and where we're situated. We're in down by the St. Vital Mall. If you've been in Winnipeg, we're kind of the high school is nearest to the mall. So if you're taking a look around, there's some tennis courts. This is who we are this year. About 1,130 students, 1,100 grades 9 and 12. And 110 adults in the building, teachers and EAs, plus then we also have the custodial crew. So there's a lot of folks that are kicking around. 3 vice principals and 1 principal that kind of runs the show. So we end up with quite a few people. It's a very busy place. I know that when I've talked to and presented with some other folks, they go, well, that's starting to feel like half the size of our school division or half the size of this or that. In L'Oreal, 10% of everyone who's hired by L'Oreal is at Dakota. So we're 10% of the school division. There's 40 schools. So this is a project that they tried to roll out, and it's having some success in one school where anything can go wrong. That was part of the reason to do it at Dakota, was let's do it in a large place where we're going to run into a variety of problems and then try and solve those through a variety of iterations as we move forward and we ramp up year at a time. So everyone goes to Dakota. You might think, well, it's in the suburbs, it's a suburban school. No, we've got all kinds of folks, high and low socioeconomic status. If you take a look at that area when you're driving through Winnipeg, you'll notice there's an awful lot of high-rises in that area. And there's a lot of kids that live in those buildings who come to our school. Okay? It's not just folks that are living down somewhere near Southdale, which is in the news today. But we'll look from there. It's all sorts of folks that are coming here. And we have a very large international student population, EAL population. We have a sister school in Japan, so we get folks coming from Japan. Everybody goes to Dakota. We've got people right across any given spectrum that you would like to name, whether it be ability or money or what their abilities might happen to be. We've got everyone going there. And so, in the first year, 09-10, I got this email. And I was like, hey, what are we going to do? How are we going to make this happen? And we started a process. That summer, I went away to a conference out in Alberta and learned a little bit about their Emerge program. We did some research with regard to what was going on in Massachusetts with regard to one-to-one programs. And at the time, New Brunswick had a really awesome program. They were probably leaders in Canada with regard to making sure that there was technology infusion in schools. Now, of course, Manitoba had the literacy with ICT continuum, which was excellent up to about grade 8. But we were looking not only internationally and not only in the States, but we wanted to see what was going on in Canada. And New Brunswick and Alberta in particular, their research influenced our decisions to go to a bring your own device one-to-one, which is different than just one-to-one, because all students are expected to bring their own machine, even though everybody goes to Dakota. And how are you going to do that? So there are some problems. So in the year 2, so your 5 fingers, not year 1. I'll go back and talk about year 1 in a moment. But in year 2, everyone started to bring their machines. So note to anyone who's a decision maker in the room, you have to give everyone a complete year of PD and focus. Everyone that's involved, all your parents, all of your teachers, okay, all the students, everyone needs a full year before you're going to be able to move in and make this work. At least that's the way that we ended up going about it in L'Oreal. 600 started to bring in the next year, and then this year, while we're coming up to 2014, 2015 in the fall, it'll be everyone. Everyone will be bringing. And it'll be about 1,100 students enrolled in what it is. Our school's getting just a little bit smaller. And so that's what we're going to be taking a look at from grades 9 to 12. So, 3 quick questions to answer with regard to this. How did we get here? Does it work? And is it good? That's what I'd like you to do. And I'm going to cut to the chase and give you the answers right away. If you were in the longer version of this presentation, I get to this next slide at the end, after we talk. But here's the answer. There's the answer. So it's like flipping to the answer key at the back. Okay, how did we get here? We got here together. This was not a top-down decision. It wasn't bottom-up. It wasn't parent-driven by a PAC. It was kind of everyone together saying, well, we're going to try and make this work, and we think it's probably better than not doing it. That seemed to be the thing that kept coming up. We want to move in this direction, and we're not sure how exactly to do it. Does it work? Yes, it works, but it's continual work. It's not a fait accompli. It's not something you can say, congratulations, mission accomplished, we have now included technology in the classroom. Forget it. It does not work that way. You will continually be working on this. If you get started in it, you're going to keep doing it. And is it good? Absolutely. I don't want to go back. Actually, I was in this room in 1994 when I found out that I could maybe get a job in South Texas. Go Bobcats. So I went to South Texas email. My first email was when I was in Texas. So I know that what it was like through the 90s and through the 2000s. And now, I don't want to go back. So it changes the way that I take a look at jobs. Well, how do you end up taking a look at technology infusion? What do you do? How am I doing for time?
You're fine. You're at about 6.5 minutes.
Okay, let's keep going. About 30 seconds a slide for those of you that are worried. That first year, going back to the first year, what did we do? And this slide came from a presentation that was done by one of our vice principals, Ali Hassan, when he's talking to all kinds of folks with regard to what we're up to. And you'll notice that it starts in May. So where's the 2009 year? Like, you know, September, October, November, December of 2009, where is that? Well, there were discussions going on with the board office about what are we going to do? What should we do? And then the board office approached our principal, who then approached us. And by the time that April rolled around, I got that email I was telling you about. It said, let's form a committee, let's go on a trip. Sounded great. So as a teacher, I went to Arizona without students on a trip. That's weird. That doesn't happen. It's happened once in my career. And I started in '94. It was strange. So we went, we checked it out. We learned a little bit about what one-to-one could look like if all the students had machines provided to them, and if you built a school from the ground up, and if you got to choose whichever staff you wanted. It was a model school. If you got to, you know, have a clean slate and start up, and that was not our school. We had a building that was built in '64, an established staff, limited resources. It wasn't going to happen. So it was nice to see, but there was just no way that we were going to be able to replicate that. And we had all kinds of questions. At the end of May and June of that year, that first year, oh, what's this going to be like? How did it apply at Dakota? Were we going to be able to do this? And wait a minute, people are saying we need to change. I'm a little offended by that because I'm a good teacher and I work hard. Well, you have all these cultural sorts of changes that you have to make. Please don't think for a moment that it's primarily about bringing a machine into a classroom. There's all kinds of stuff that you have to unpack with regard to pedagogy, philosophy, worldview, that you need to take a look at with staff, with parents, with students, with your teachers before you move forward. So these were all of our questions, and then it was June 30th, so we all took off and went and had fun. I went to Banff, as I was telling you. And when we came back in September, so this is the second year, we had Ian Jukes come in from BC. Again, focus on trying to find Canadian models for these things. There's a lot of models of 21st century skills, which sounds so dated now, 21st century, but if you want to go Google something, 21st century learning, you know, you're going to find all of this sort of a thing. I tend to call it digital learning now. I think it'll probably last longer than 21st century learning, but we found Ian's stuff, and it's really good. So most of these models, as we were starting to research them, and we took a look at Trilling and Fidel, we looked at Ian's and a few others, and we thought, well, this is one that we can live with. And we also developed our own model. We took his stuff, and it's a bit of a pastiche. We pulled it all together from a variety of different places and invented our own model. And then we divided our staff into all kinds of committees. And I was a part of that first steering committee, and I've been on board with this project since then. And so that steering committee, and then we ended up with this infrastructure committee, what kinds of things we're going to need. And you see what I mean? This is when you use someone else's computer. Mike was so kind to, no, don't panic, Mike. I can take care of it, I think. Postpone. See, that's what you just hit the postpone button. We're good. Okay, so models. This is what I was talking about with Ian Jukes and all. Like, what are we doing? Like, what's our pedagogy here? Digital citizenship. What's responsible ethical use look like? So we had groups of teachers, and because the staff was large enough, we could divide our staff into these groups, find people who were willing, volunteers, and then find a few who were voluntold to be on committees. So it's a little bit of both. That was in the second year, and we got all these things up and running. And notice there's not a whole lot about how do you use this program in my class. There was an applications committee, but really that's not the large piece of the pizza here. That's a small part of it. Moving on. The admin team was meeting every week. There's a lot of face-to-face collaboration. You're not going to be able to deal with this thing in text messages and email. You're going to have to talk to people a lot. It takes up a lot of your time to do all that. And then the division was running all kinds of work as well for us with regard to going to parent advisory councils for all of our grade 8 schools, talking to the parents about what they were going to have to do. So it was there were many different fronts. There were many different areas that we needed to take a look at. Et cetera, that's Ali's stuff, so I've got that in there, but there you go. That year, the admin decided, I pitched it and they decided, yeah, that makes sense. I said, I know we've got these new computer cards, because this was a part of it. Now you're thinking, wait a minute, all the students bring their own device. Yes, this is before we even got there. This is before we got there. And I had this card, and I said, I want to use it, and I don't want to share it with anybody. Sounds shocking. Well, we have a resource, we need to distribute it fairly among the school. No, I want to be able to run a pilot here so that I can learn how to do it and then replicate that with other teachers. So I made that argument, and my boss said, yeah, okay, let's do it that way. And so we went ahead with that. I learned how to try and deal with teaching in this sort of a thing. Students started by handing in all of their work as email attachments. Not the greatest learning management system, but it worked. But then I discovered that my teaching needed to change. Because now how am I grading all of these things? How am I assessing? How am I dealing with the for, as, and of with regard to assessment? How do I do that? So a rolling chair is really, really awesome. You should get yourself a rolling chair, get down at the level of students. Hi, how are you? What's on your screen? What are you doing here? They're going to ask you questions that they never ask otherwise anyway. Hey, what's this tab key for? You would be surprised at how many kids don't know what a tab key is for or how to use it. Space, 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 space. Not kidding. That's how it's supposed to. So how do you know that unless you get down with the students? And you'll notice that gets me away from the front of the classroom. Okay, so that gets me over here, right? Oh no, he's coming up here. Not for very long because he doesn't have much time. But it gets me down close to the students in terms of what's going on, right? Which is what you'll hear over and over again with regard to these 21st century models. So at Dakota, we mix the old and the new. Here's a math classroom. Kids have computers up. There's desks. There's chairs. They're kind of sitting in pairs. You'll notice that there's some sort of a presenter and a screen up at the front. Some things change. Our school division won't buy us bulbs for these things anymore. They won't. That makes some teachers mad. What? You're not going to buy me a bulb for my overhead projector? No, we'll buy you one for that. We'll buy you a bulb for your media projector, but we're not buying you a bulb for that anymore. That's done. It's over. It's going away. In high school, the kids that you're teaching are growing up in a world where Google has always existed. Like for you, airplanes have always existed? Yeah, Google has always existed. So these things need to go away. Moving on. Some things stay the same. We use paper. We use pens, pencils. If you were to go through the school and take a look, you know, it's not like Star Trek. You know, it looks like a high school. But some things do change. The phones are around. People are using these things. Okay? There is a time and place for everything. And I'm almost done. Oh, 1 minute left. Perfect. He's even got a sign that says 1 minute left. So in the gym, you know, maybe you shouldn't have your phone in the gym. Maybe you got to be careful with regard to what's going on in terms of how you take care of these things. Bringing a $300, $400, $500 computer is different than bringing a $2 binder with paper. Well aware of that. You may have some questions about those things, and we can deal with that in the Q&A. If you haven't written down any good questions yet, that's a hint. You might want to ask that. Okay. So how did we get here? We got here together. It wasn't some top-down thing. It wasn't bottom-up. It wasn't just the parents. Does it work? Yeah. We're always learning. And it is good. This is a good way to go. It's absolutely necessary. You think of the number of people that are growing up not knowing that Google never existed, not really believing that. You all believe that airplanes have always existed. They're always there. We assume them. We assume an awful lot. Kids in high school are assuming Google. So that's it for me. There's some references, and if you want to chit chat later on, you can. Thank you.
Next up, I'd like to call Andy, Michaela and Darren from
Darren's good.
from St. James Savoy.
We're just going to very quickly swap out our displays here, and then we'll be ready to go. Is our 15 minutes starting right now, or is this? 20 seconds? Okay. Cross your fingers. Okay. So we're here to tell St. James Savoy School Division story a little bit about how we are going mobile. And as much as we've learned lessons from Louis Riel School Division, I think we're sort of going about it in a very different way. Yes.
So my name is Darren Kirkpatrick. I'm originally from Montreal, moved here in '98, became department head of mathematics at a large inner city school in Winnipeg, seconded to the Department of Education, 1 year English, 1 year French. Now I work with the St. James School Division in Dandy. And if you want to know more about me /D Kirkpatrick online.
And I'm Andy McKeel. I started my teaching career at the turn of the century in the St. James School Division. I was a grade 4 classroom teacher. I did that for about 7 years, and for the last 7 years, I've actually been working in this role, supporting teachers and administrators and students across our school division with the infusion of technology, and involved in lots of different committees around the province of Manitoba.
So when we were looking for a framework or a model around which we wanted to pin our ideas with regard to the way we wanted to use technology in our school division, we came up with this model, which we actually stole from a guy by the name of David Jakes down in Chicago. We call it the 5 C's: communication, collaboration, critical thinking, creativity, which is typically what people talk about when they talk about 21st century learning, but we added that 5th one, which we call citizenship. And this kind of provided the framework around which we structured our professional development, which we started 3 years ago. For teachers, teachers and students learning side by side together, sometimes just teachers alone, sometimes groups of them. We'll talk more about that, what the PD looked like a little bit later, but these are the 5 lenses that we look through when we're trying to think pedagogically, how will the technology make a difference, or how does it make sense in the context of learning.
St. James School Division, I think, around the province has a reputation for being sort of technology rich. There's a lot of dollars spent on putting technology in the hands of students, but that technology is changing. We do have a lot of access to technology, probably more so than many rural school divisions and some of the other urban school divisions, but the tools have changed. When I started doing what I'm doing at the division level in St. James, it was when Literacy with ICT first came to be. And at that point in time, we pulled out all of our computer labs, K to 8, and replaced them with roaming mobile Apple carts. So we had carts of like 25 laptops that teachers could wheel into the classroom. Those don't exist anymore in our school division. We knew that there had to be another change coming as the tools continue to change and evolve.
So yeah, and the mobile carts, by the way, they stayed in the high schools. We still have mobile carts, and we still have computer labs in the high schools. We'll talk about the differences a little later, but the other thing that we have, about 2 years ago, we made the decision to install an interactive whiteboard, in our case smartboards, in every instructional space across the school division. And that was before the advent of any of these kind of one-to-one technologies that we're talking about. And so that began to set the stage for thinking seriously about in what ways will this technology begin to change the face of teaching and learning in our classrooms.
And all of our schools, all of our classrooms now do have a computer on the teacher's desk. And I know in many school divisions they can make the same claim. My wife teaches in another school division in Winnipeg, and she has a classroom computer. I think it's running Windows 3.1, if I'm not mistaken. So very little value to her and her students. But every teacher has a classroom computer connected to their smartboard. They have a mounted projector. The sky's the limit in terms of how and where they bring in technology and the things that they do with that technology.
So enter the iPads. So what happened with the iPads is this wasn't a decision that was made overnight. We also had pilot projects where we looked at what would it look like in early years, middle years, and senior years. Those pilot projects look very different. We'll get to that a little later. But we also we were at the end of a lease. So we lease all of our technology. And at the end of a 3-year lease, we know that the decision that we're making this year is the decision that's going to carry us through the following 3 years. So we've got to make the right decision now, not for today, but for tomorrow. So when we looked at the cost of leasing, we are K to 8 Apple computers in the Apple products mostly in the schools, and 9 to 12 PC-based devices. So when we were looking at the cost of refreshing all of the Apple laptops, for the cost of replacing about 12 laptops, we could get 49 iPads. And when we started to think, well, if every kid's got a device, if every kid's got an iPad or some kind of device that they can use, then why do we need computer stations in the library? Every kid's walking around with a mobile, so we won't need those desktop computers because everybody will have their own device, teachers included. And as we began to explore this in more and more detail and thought through what are the implications of doing this, it quickly became not a question of should we, it became a how can't we do this, because it made economic sense.
So I guess that begs the question, what does it look like? How are we implementing iPads and how are we rolling out iPads in our schools? Well, every one of our teachers, K to 12, has an iPad, and we'll talk about how those got rolled out very shortly. But in our schools, at the different levels, we have very different models for what this actually looks like. And one of the reasons that we did this has to do with engagement. There's some data that's about 1.5 years old now that came out of the CEA, the Canadian Education Agency, that looks at engagement. And you can see very quickly, from kindergarten down to grade 8, there's a rapid decline in terms of student engagement, and it's at an all-time low in grade 8, and then it starts to pick up a little bit in high school. So we really wanted to look at how we can increase engagement with our middle year students. So at the middle years, that's really where this started. We are one-to-one. Every middle year student was given an iPad through the school division. And they can have it, they can use it, they're encouraged to bring it home with them in the evening, on the weekends. They can do with their iPad what they want to do with their iPad, with some limitations. Early years is a slightly different story. We know that we want to see iPads in our early years classrooms, but instead of having everyone with access to their own iPad, it's a shared environment. We have 7 iPads in every grade 1 to 5 classroom, and in every kindergarten classroom we have 3 iPads. So when the teachers would like the students to have opportunities to use the iPads in a center, as a station, just a table of kids working together doing some research, they have the technology in place. The senior years is a slightly different story.
Yeah, I mean, in the early years, sometimes when they need more iPads in the classroom, they borrow the next door classroom's iPad so they can have a larger group. But in the senior years, the instructional demands of teaching senior years is completely different. We can't get away from labs because there are some courses, graphic design, etc., that require those labs. There's also the question of equity, and that's actually the #1 question that parents, kids, teachers, and administrators across the division have with regard to BYOD. So in the senior years, what it looks like is we're going to a BYOD environment, and that's not fully being implemented until September 2014. There's a lot of PD that's happening behind the scenes in order to get that set up. But what we're doing right now, and what we tried to make sure is ready this year in advance, is to set up the infrastructure. In other words, we've got wireless and robust wireless that is going to be able to support kids throughout the building, all being on the wireless at the same time. And that was the first thing that had to be in place to make everything else possible. And it had not just the seniors, actually. We needed that in every single building, all the way through. But before we got into BYOD, we had to make sure that we had that infrastructure in place, as well as a plan by which we would manage the devices on the network. And we're very gentle in terms of the word manage. We don't heavily manage devices, and we're not very draconian in our approach about it. Professional learning in the division was key in order to set this up. So, for example, we're not fully implementing BYOD until September of this year, but all of this year, we've got teachers in much of our professional development is focusing on how do we prepare for the coming of BYOD. Because the wireless infrastructure is already in place, teachers in many classrooms across the school division were already beginning to explore different ways of teaching when you allow all the students to bring their own devices in. In the year previous to this one, we had pilot projects of a pod of iPads in an early years classroom, one-to-one. We did one-to-one desktop, one-to-one laptops and one-to-one iPads in 2 different middle years classrooms to see what would be the best model going forward. And we had a BYOD pilot in a high school classroom as well. So in order to support all of that, the professional development had to be persistent, and it had to be available to every teacher in the school division as needed. So many school divisions only have 1 person that does our job. Our school division has 3. 3 people that were dedicated specifically to digital learning across the school division. That role actually has changed. There's now, like originally my title was Curriculum Coordinator for Digital Learning, Andy and I both. Now we're just curriculum coordinators, along with a team of 9 curriculum coordinators, and we're all just curriculum coordinators, and we're all equally responsible to support the professional learning of teachers, with the primary focus being on instruction.
So with the iPads come many different opportunities, and I'm sure you've heard about all kinds of things that teachers and students are able to do when given access to tools like this in the classroom. But it doesn't come without its challenges. We have encountered many, many challenges along the way, and we've learned some lessons the hard way, because nobody is doing this in the same kind of scale in this province, even in this country that we know about. There's a lot of eyes on what's happening within our school division. We started off by making sure that parents were on board with this, having a series of information nights where parents could come out and find out the rationale behind this, find out all the logistics, the ins and outs of what happens when students have iPads. But there are many other challenges that we've seen along the way. The first one had to do with what apps do we put onto these devices. We only have so much money to spend on the apps. We spent money on the hardware, we needed to spend some money on the software. So we didn't want to have an app for everything. What we did is we went with this set of apps that really is, we sort of refer to them as the Swiss Army knife of apps. They do so many different things, and they're apps that allow students to show what they know, to make stuff, to create stuff, rather than just flashcards or something along those lines.
Yeah, so there were other challenges with regard to the way Apple releases its software. So any of you who own an Apple device know that they like to release new system software around the second or third week of September. We start school the very first week of September. And so what ended up happening for us is we had everything ready to go, and then Apple releases the new system software. So how are we going to roll that out to 1,800 students and 800 staff? We decided to hold the iPads back so that we could re-image all the iPads with the new system software, etc. We had purchased some software in preparation for this, Keynote, Pages, Numbers. iOS 7 comes along and all those apps are free. So that presented, and updates continue to be a challenge. That continues to be problematic in the sense of we have literally thousands of the devices scattered across the school division, and in order to update them, you have to have someone from our IT department actually physically touch the device. An iPad is a very different device than it would be with a managed computer where you can push software out. Someone actually has to touch it. So this initial year, we wanted everyone to have their stuff in September. Realistically, and to be honest, we knew this in the spring, that there would be unforeseen snags. And so realistically, the middle years started getting their iPads in October. I think we wrapped it up by end of November, maybe beginning December. The early years schools got their iPads. They were ready to go just before we went on break. They actually got them at the beginning of January when they got back from break. So moving forward though, next year it's only grade 6s that will be required to have new devices. So this will be much more efficient moving forward, but we learned a lot.
Another issue is storage and charging. You've got all these iPads in school, but how do you possibly keep them all charged and secured? All the different charging systems and storage systems that we saw were very, very expensive. So our IT department actually sort of priced out what we needed to do, and we built something like 300 storage lockers at a fraction of the cost of what the retail value would be for these carts. And that really only applies to the early years where we have these sets of iPads, because the middle years kids, they bring the devices home. So there's one cart in every middle year school. All the early year schools have a cart in each classroom to store and charge.
Yeah, so the way we manage the devices is we use an app called AirWatch in order to manage all the mobile devices in our division, which allows us to kind of push an app out to the devices, and then the user has to accept the downloading of that app, etc. We also have, the iPads have dual profiles on them. There's a division-based profile, which only the division controls and can put apps on. And then each student has their own Apple ID, each teacher has their own Apple ID, and they use those Apple IDs to buy whatever apps they like that they choose to buy. Many of them usually just buy the free apps because that's available to them. And so they can update those apps on their own. They don't need any of us to come out. We were very deliberate about not putting any free apps on the iPads so that they could download the free apps themselves and they could maintain the updates on those apps themselves.
One issue that we've had major problems with is breakage, damage. We were told, there's a school in Scotland too who's been doing great stuff with iPads, but Apple told us, don't worry about it. The kids are going to treat them like they're their own. They're going to take good care of them. That hasn't been the case. We've had upwards of 100 iPads now come back with cracked glass, damage. It has been a problem. Turns out the case we went with initially wasn't cutting it.
Yeah, and so the deployment that I talked about is kind of like, I've already alluded to it, how it was rolled out with the teachers got their iPads, the middle years teachers got their iPads in the spring, preparing for the rollout in the fall. The senior years and early years teachers got their teacher iPads at the very beginning of the school year in September. We wanted to make sure that they had the devices before the kids got theirs.
So I think bottom line, there's a lot of concern that kids are way too plugged into devices. They're spending their life in front of a piece of glass, not interacting with each other. It's not all iPads all the time. It definitely changes the game in terms of teaching and learning in our classrooms and schools, but it's not all about the iPad. This is one tool that can do many, many different things, but we still have kids picking up pencils and writing on pieces of paper.
Yeah, and it's about what is teaching and learning look like today? When you have ubiquitous access, when at any time, anywhere, you have access to the world's global knowledge commons at your fingertips, and you can access that on demand. How do we prepare students? Like, this is the first time in history that we're preparing students for jobs that don't yet exist, using technologies that haven't been invented yet to solve problems we don't even know are problems yet. And that's the first time we've ever had to do that in the history of education. So one of the things, I've got no idea what the future is going to look like, but I had no idea that my youngest daughter would think that the way you interact with technology is by reaching out and touching it and swiping it. The first time she sat in front of a laptop, she reached across and said, "Daddy, it's broken." What are our children's children going to think about interacting with technology? What are they going to think about? What are they going to take for granted about how we interact with information? We've got no idea what that's going to look like, but we've got to start preparing them today for tomorrow. Thanks.
Thank you.
Lastly, I just want to call up Marvin and Tannis from Manitoba Collegiate.
All right, thank you.
Going last, is it our privilege to say what they said?
Well,
Q&A?
that was our plan. That was our whole spiel to say that. But obviously, I think there's a lot of differences in what we do at Manitoba Collegiate and in Rolling River School Division than you gentlemen were talking about. Some of you, well, you've probably got more teachers in your school divisions than we have kids in ours. So when you're talking about committees and curriculum coordinators, that's us. We have, well, when we started this, we had about 205 students in our first year, last year in our school, and about 12 and a half, 13 teachers at that time, and we were the committee. We were the professional development, and had, I have to say, a tremendous amount of support from our school division. So as Tannis loads that up, I just want to make sure I hit on these points, because I guess our goal is to talk to you about what we did as a school division, or as a school to start with, how we did it, what we did. Mike, I added why we did it too, because there was an important why in that. And we want to talk about the the differences in what we've done in our school, and some of the differences, and I think 3 differences that make us a little bit, or possibly unique, is in the fact that we are one-to-one, but we offer our student choice. We don't rely on one device. We don't limit student access on the network. Our wide area network is wide open.
We'll do that later too.
Perfect.
Okay.
You good?
Close.
And our school division as well pays for the devices. They provide all of the cost, because equity in education is very important in our school division. And we didn't want any barriers or limitations on any of our students. And in our school division, it's restricted just to the high school.
And in talking around the staff room table, this perfect storm kept coming out, so I wanted to try and fit that in here. It just, as other school divisions have said, it was a timing thing. We were ready to get new computers in our computer labs 2 years ago. Those computers were at the 6-year mark, so obviously now they're 8 years old. Not quite Windows 3.1, which was a great operating system, but not today. So we had to look at what were we going to do. Are we going to upgrade that and then just keep that functional lab in one place for our then about 200 students and 25 stationary computers? Or were we going to look to something bigger? Were we going to look at one-to-one? Were we going to take that money and reallocate it? And as it turns out, it was a cost-effective decision.
Well, it really was, as it says there, our estimated cost for the fall of 2012 to replace our 142 desktops and laptops throughout the school, and that's in classrooms as well, our library, 2 computer labs, was going to be $85,200, based on a $600 per unit cost, which was really significant. And then we were going to have to, once again, try and get anywhere from 6 to 9 years out of it. So when that happened, also with the completion of the divisional wide area network, or I guess our ability to access fiber optics, which was huge for us, we had these conversations for years in our school about the importance of going this way with technology and changing pedagogy in our schools. But we couldn't, because the infrastructure of our school division and our broadband, it just didn't support it, so we couldn't do that. However, when we really needed to update those computers, it coincided with the fiber optics, and everything just kind of aligned.
And the division gave us some latitude to be able to do that. As classroom teachers, I guess in a way it was sort of bottom up too from our school division, starting with our staff, wanting to eliminate that booking of the computer lab and, okay, here's all the pre-learning, now go, you've got 20 minutes on the lab, and then another teacher comes, all those transition times, and to make it, as we've heard, just another tool. So it was just part of what they did. It was a natural assumption.
And of the 20 minutes the kids had in the lab, 10 minutes was booting up the computers. Still is that way. We still have one lab, and we're phasing it out slowly, and I'll explain how we're doing that. And I think that's where you want it to be, is the next one.
Yeah, I kind of did. Sorry, this is,
There it is.
I'm going to not touch that thing anymore. Okay, and what you just saw there is part of what you see every day in teaching in a classroom where kids have different technology, even if it's not school division provided, which is the way we went. Flexibility is the name of the game, and just you got to get the job done. So what we did in year one, which was we're partway through our first year, so it's the 2012-13 school year when we started. Our kids came in with no devices. The devices were not actually in the students' hands until the beginning of February, because that was the start of our second semester. We did that on purpose because we had taken years before coming up with the plan. We spent a lot of time seeing our challenges coming up, talking about, are we all going to have the same devices? How will we, if they're different, how can we possibly deal with that if they're not doing exactly the same thing every single minute? We very quickly got past that, by the way. The price point the division gave us was based around $400 a student. And that year, in 2012-2013, we started about end of October, it's about Halloween time. And I have the pleasure of teaching all the grade 9s and 10s every school day all year. So starting with the grade 9s that year, just after Halloween, we had devices. We had iPads, we had 7 tablets, we had netbooks, and we had some laptops, and the kids got to try them out. And we had worked with our staff to try and get real assignments. So where can you see yourself in second semester with these kids instead of just, oh, send me an email and things like that. So we tried to give the kids a decent test drive, which 1 year later, the test drive they had this September was much different, but that's how we go. And try and learn as we go. So the kids got to try them out, and they each got their choice of a division-provided device. In that particular year, so these are now our grade 10s, they had 34 iPads and 16 laptops. There was a handful of netbooks that the kids were choosing in December. They knew they'd get them by February. And lean on sounds wrong, but we strongly encouraged a handful of kids. I think we had 6 netbooks and 4 next to 7 tablets that were in these numbers, but those very quickly, the kids by spring break were given a choice to choose to move on to a different device. So at the end of grade 9 for those kids in grade 10, we now have 34 iPads and 16 laptops. We feel now going forward that our instinct of letting the kids choose was critical, because the kids who got a choice, and they're invested in those machines. They don't own them. The plan is that when they finish grade 12, they will have possession of the devices. But until then, it's like a long-term loan of a library book. The amount of damage we've seen, now we have a lot fewer kids, has been pretty minimal. The kids that were handed the iPads didn't get any apps. They had to set up their own stuff in terms of an Apple ID. They didn't get any cases. We had talked to kids beforehand about it might be a good idea to look at a case of some kind to protect this, to maybe have a keyboard. Those kids going into grade 10, at least half of them, probably more, have cases for their iPads with keyboards. The laptop kids are hardcore. They knew right from the start, those kids, that they wanted to be able to have that, the size of screen, the size of keyboard. They were PC kids. Some of them were already into movies and music and stuff. They knew, and they would never change. They were very invested. Same with the iPad kids, although some of the iPad kids are now bringing their own laptops and using the iPad for visuals, and then they like to type on the laptop. But those are pretty few and far between. The kids are pretty invested. And when I said when the kids got to choose, we as a school division let the kids choose. I know some parents, small town, some of these things. Some of the parents lean pretty heavily on their kids to choose one or the other based on their belief of what would work for their kid or what would be good for school. And those handful, I think we had 3 kids. 2 of those kids were the quickest to be damaged, and a third one is now asking, can they change? And the school division isn't offering loan outs and changes every time, so the kids have to try them and they're with them. But please bring your own device has always been our option if you're not happy with the school division one.
And that was an important part of the process, I think, in year 1 was, and the school division allowed us in this one instance, in this 1 year, to give the students an opportunity to change partway through if they weren't happy with their decision. Particularly, I think the kids, some kids were kind of tricked into picking the Nexus tablets because nobody wanted them. And we really liked what they could do for battery life because they were smaller screens. They didn't need as long a battery life as, say, the laptop. So we wanted to try them. We wanted to see for ourselves as well, so we needed some kids to try them. So they did, and then they didn't, we don't have anyone with
they were a great budget little device. However, they did weird things, and they didn't even work well with Google apps. So go figure, because it's another device.
Yeah. So anyway, that was, and then year 2, of course, we rolled it out a little bit differently, but this year it included the whole school division, except unfortunately for Erickson Collegiate, our northernmost high school in the division, because their fiber has been delayed, their installation of their fiber optics, so they don't have the infrastructure to support it. So I think by September, is that right? They're supposed to be up and running, we hope. So the other 3 all 3 high schools, or 3 of the 4 high schools in our division are now have the 1-to-1. So we have the 9s and 10s. Next year we'll have 11s, 10s, 9s, and then the following year our whole school will be equipped. And that's our goal. So and then the rest of the school division will be 1 year behind us, and then we're all set. So that was our intent.
And this year's rollout was a shorter timeline because we as staff were more comfortable. So the kids did their trial period towards the end of September, beginning of October. Holy cow, 5 minutes left.
Oh, really?
And they had them by the beginning of November, and the staff was prepared for that because we taught second semester last year with this system. You'll see the Surface was a new option this year because it fit in with the budget constraints, and the kids went for it whole hog. They don't seem quite as robust as a laptop. Definitely the battery life is there. We're having issues with some of the keyboards, but we're sorting it out. And Martin asked if I chose that picture on purpose, and I did. If it was larger, you could see they're sitting in front of our 10 minutes to boot up desktops, and then they have their Surfaces in front. I posed that picture. That's not what the classroom actually is.
So I'm not going to go through all these, but these were some of the conversations and discussion points that we had as a staff. In the years leading up to year 1's rollout, there was a lot of debate, discussion, and some of the debate was somewhat heated because not everybody was at the same place, not everybody on staff, wanted to do this. I felt really comfortable in moving in this direction as an administrator because I have a very tech-savvy staff, and I knew they were ready, and I knew together we can flesh this stuff out. So these may be some of the questions you have for us as part of the panel piece of this afternoon, but a lot of really important questions that if you're going in this direction, you've got to address. In fact, when we talked to the other schools, when the other schools were getting ready to roll this out and plan for it, the questions were almost identical to ours.
And we never intended for you to read these. We can provide the PowerPoint to Mike. It was meant as this is how we felt as classroom teachers with all the weight of all these questions going in, and how is this even possible with a handful of teachers? So
are some of the lessons that we learned, student choice, for us, we believe is key because it gives them greater buy-in, and we found that they do treat their devices with respect because of that empowerment. And parent communication is key, and we've heard that already a couple times this afternoon. Equitable access, so there's no financial barriers, I've already addressed that. Teacher commitment, and Connect for Success. And I want to spend a minute about Connect for Success because Tana said she has the pleasure of, I like how you said that, she has the pleasure of teaching our grade 9s and 10s. It's probably not a pleasure every day, but most days it is.
Yes,
We have a class, it's our own course, we've designed, it's called Connect for Success. Our students in grade 9 and 10 don't have any spares built into their day. They're fully loaded on the front end at grade 9 and 10. Every second day, Tanis works, she teaches them life work at 9 and 10. Every second day all year. On opposite day, she has Connect for Success. And that's where those kids come to TANIS with their devices, with their homework, with their test preparation, and they have a supervised spare. They learn study skills, time management skills, ethical use with their devices. We have presenters come in at that time so it doesn't take away from their other curriculum areas. And TANIS is the point person. This is why, Mike, I asked if I could bring TANIS. TANIS is the point person for this whole one-to-one thing for the school, and that's pivotal, I think, at least it was for us, in rolling this out and making it work effectively for kids, because TANIS is the one, the go-to person. She sees them every day, and she checks in with them every day. She downplayed it because what I had on the slide was, it was much more...
We're running out of time.
Yeah, I know, much more important in the role that she plays, but I wanted to just highlight that.
And we have become a team as we've gone through this. I'm not just the point person. We have people that are specializing in, well, the last slide we have here is reaching higher, with a tiny little Twitter chat there, because I started and have a long time been the tech person, sort of in the school division. If people needed help booting something up, I was kind of, let's help let's make sure it's plugged in before we call someone from division office kind of person. But now my staff and all of us are challenging each other. Our staff meetings are lots about the pedagogy and how do we amp this up? How do we get the kids thinking up here instead of, they've got the great knowledge base here. Let's quit asking them to list things and that sort of stuff. So our staff, I think we're in a good spot to talk about the perfect storm because we all push and pull each other and are comfortable with that and having each other in and out of our classrooms. And it's a good model because the kids cooperate too and they see that. So that's why the Twitter chat was there, because as our last point, I guess, that was an interesting thing. I don't teach grade 11 history, but I was invited in on a Twitter chat, and so was Martin, some of our other men in our school division, and people from Brandon, by our 30S history teacher. I've never been in line in the canteen and had a kid talk to me about what Louis Riel was thinking when he came back to Manitoba. Seriously, like, can I just get my sandwich? But what a neat conversation. And the kids, it started with the Twitter chat because they saw me on there. So they were comfortable asking questions. And I think it got even bigger than our history teacher thought that it would be because, wow, that was a lot more than here's page 37, read 37, answer questions 1 to 10, we'll talk to you tomorrow, right? And that's where we're striving to get, is to get the kids there too.
He was able to draw in students from other grades that were interested in history, not part of the class. I was at a workshop, I was out of town, I was drawn in along with one of my colleagues who's a history buff. As Tana said, 2 people from Brandon were drawn in and more people, and that got the level of engagement of the kids up. Plus, those students that were absent from school that day, they didn't miss it. It was kind of neat. They were part of the conversation, had a lot to contribute.
I can't believe we did it, but we're out of time.
Okay.
Thanks for having us.
Thanks.
First off, I would like to thank all of our panel speakers for coming and talking with us today. If we could just give them all another round of applause. And we're going to take a short refreshment break until about 10 after 3, so that gives you about 15 minutes, and then we'll call everyone back for question and answer. So if anyone has any questions. Chris?
My question is in terms of monitoring student use of devices, especially for the ones like the high schools and the ones where they're allowed to take them home or encouraged to take them home. Do you monitor what they're using, how they're using the devices, and if so, how do you do it?
Sitting at the end of the row here, maybe I'll just jump in first. So that was one of the things that we talked about very early on. Before any devices landed in our school division, we wanted to know how far we should go in terms of regulating the use of these devices. And that is a feature that can be used on the iPad. We could have set it up in such a way that we had a profile on the student iPads where when they go home, they can only connect to the internet through a proxy server through our school division. So we could have the same filtering in place on that iPad that they would have in the classroom in school. We decided not to do that because really it's paramount that we are working with parents on this initiative. Parents have to know the fact that their kids have abilities to connect in different ways using their device. So, you know, we talk a lot about digital citizenship and ethical and responsible use of technology, and we very clearly communicate to parents that they do have a role to play in this as well. And when their child has that device at home, if they're spending hours in their bedroom with the door closed at night, you may want to go check out what they're doing on their iPad. You know, it's just like in the old days where the computer should be somewhere that the parents can see the screen. The same kind of rules apply for us.
We, at our middle years, when we rolled this out, we had a parent information evening. And these were some of the questions that the parents were asking too. And we answered them by saying, you know, we want this to be a conversation between you and your child. Like, your child should be able to come home and you should be able to ask them, what did you create today? And they should be able to show you. Also, something that's different in the middle years because it is a one-to-one environment, the student handbook and the parent handbook is actually published as an iTunes U course. And in the setup of the device, it's one of the first things that the kids do is subscribe to that iTunes U course. And so we tell the parents, like, this is where all the information is for you about your child and the device, as well as tips. Like, don't, like what Andy was saying, don't ever leave the iPad alone with the child in their bedroom. It should be recharging in a public area of the house, etc., which touches on some of the digital ethic concerns. But we also were very deliberate about sharing that handbook digitally to cut down on paper. We don't think we're going to a paperless environment, but we are moving to low paper. And we want it to be a conversation between mom and dad and their son John.
So I'll give the Louisville School Division answer two different ways. First of all, we've got Merlin, so it's a filtered environment. We end up getting that through the province, through Merlin. Then it comes down to the school division, and they add some filters that they decide that they want to add to that, and then that is pushed out to be our Wi-Fi signal. So that's one answer. The other answer is that any kid that wants unfiltered access just tethers their phone to their computer, and they've got whatever they want. So filtering, we always think about that as being somehow the construction of whoever's on top, whether it be the province or the school division or the school or the principal, and then there's a filter in place. But more and more when we talk about digital citizenship, we are still talking about filtering. We're talking about what will you look at or what will you not look at? What do you choose to look at online and what do you choose not to? What do you choose to post? What do you choose not to? It's still a filter, but it's not a filter from here, it's a filter from inside. And this becomes a very important part of digital citizenship. So some of you who are libertarians might say, well, this is a form of self-censorship. I would argue the metaphor that it's more like you are what you eat. And that if you're not careful about what it is that you put in, ultimately it ends up impacting your health. We know that's also the case in the information age. So anyone can get anything they choose to get. Filtering is kind of an old argument. It made sense before, but filtering is gone. 1 in 4 kids in grade 4 has a cell phone. You know, so we need to think about other ways of thinking or framing that conversation.
Very well put at Rolling River School Division. The filters that we have are very broad through the Merlin system, and that's it. The division doesn't impose anything else. We did a quiz with our grade 9s and 10s in November when all the devices for the 9s and the 10s were in place, and one of the questions was multiple choice, what's the location of the best internet filter? And the correct answer was here. And it led to some great conversations with the kids. We need to, and what we're building towards is more conversations with parents, more planned conversations at the grade 8 meetings before they come to us in grade 9. We have had, early on, we did a survey with parents, didn't get much feedback after the last year's grade 9s got their devices, and we heard, I think, 3 different comments. My kid's on this thing all the time, and that, you know, you should just take it away, and you fielded those phone calls.
I did. Yeah, we had a lot of conversations about what parents, how parents can work with their children at home and what the expectation of those devices at home and at school are. And I mean, we had many teachable moments early on, day one. Sorry for bringing it up, but you were there, you tell me.
When the grade 9s first got their iPads, a few of them used iMessage because it was just like on their iPhone. Well, they were still set up from the divisional introduction set up, so there was a shared Apple ID in there. So when we had division staff phoning and saying, you better talk to your grade 9s, I got a text that evening at home actually, and And yeah, that was an interesting date. We texted that evening and talked the next morning and talked to the kids and just said, this is an example of what you have to be aware. It wasn't illegal stuff that they were saying, it was just nasty sort of bullying type things. And now you've shared this, how do you feel? How would you feel if your parents read it? Because I know 2 people's parents have read it and all your teachers have read it. And that was several days worth of conversations. And well, Mrs. Barrett, what would you think? And why would this? And I didn't mean. And just think next time. And so then they started to think before they.
Early on, there were a lot of students downloading movies at the school as well, and you know, the IT department was monitoring, so they caught this messaging. They caught where all of our bandwidth was going with all these movies. So when we had an opportunity to talk to the students about it, they knew we were monitoring. We don't have somebody watching all the time, but I talked to our IT department last week, and they're very pleased in the traffic, if you will, of our students. They're not concerned at all. We're more concerned, as you said, what they're accessing on their phone that we can't see. But
it's so very private.
Yeah.
Yes.
All right. Brittany?
Hi, okay, I have a follow-up question to this. I was thinking about this last time I subbed actually in Rolling River School Division because kids were always on their phones. And one thing I was worried about is, like, can the teacher, to what degree is the teacher liable for inappropriate things that get sent via social media? Like, I mean, cyberbullying has always been an issue, but it's never really been a prominent issue inside of our classroom. It's more been outside of our classroom. But now that we're doing one-to-one in so many schools, how are we supposed to monitor that type of bullying that happens right inside of our classrooms?
It is a required bring your own device. It's not even, many times when people talk about bring your own device, it's like it's an option. Like, if you own a computer, bring it, and that seems to be the policy that's set. That's not our policy. Our policy is that it is required that you bring your own device, which ups the ante in terms of how do you make sure that kids right across the spectrum can get access. So our solution to that at Dakota, because we were looking at that, how we're going to deal with this, was that we had a number of netbook computers already in the school, a number of carts, that we knew that we would be able to use in different ways. We could repurpose those. And we then watched very closely. We already knew from grade 8 intake interviews which families would most likely be on the list. So we had a most likely list of kids that would need. And the message went out very early on about, okay, well, you're going to need a computer for the beginning of grade 9. Then we identified which kids did need a computer in grade 9. And then we offered 2 kinds of loans from the school division. One was a short-term loan. I don't have my computer here today. Please go book one from the library. Please go get a computer from the library the same way that you would get a computer or a book from the library. You take it out the same way. Short-term loan, 1 day. But there were other students who were going to need something for 3, 5, 7, 10 weeks. And we had not only these netbooks that we had, but we also had a donation of a bank of 30 machines that were 3 years old that came from, I wish I could remember the name of the company, and I can't. And they said, here, use these, we like what you're doing. They came with all the chargers, and we were able to use those as well. Some people would follow with the question, well, what about stigma? What do you do with the fact that some students are going to bring a very expensive computer, some are going to bring something in the middle of the road, some are going to use the school netbook that's provided. And the truth is that we do see that kind of a range of machines. We have kids that bring in a new machine every year, some that are still working on long-term loans. But what we haven't had to deal with is the social stigma of that. We already see that playing out in the shoes that they wear, in who's driving a car to school in grade 10, 11, and 12, in the clothing. So that's sort of a take on it. Yeah, is already something that is in play in high school. And so it didn't become a separate issue, who does or doesn't bring the computer. So that's how we ended up dealing with the fact that there are a number of students who are not going to be able to afford it if you say you must bring a machine. So that's what we did. It seems to be working quite well. Of course, any program is not airtight, and we've got some work to do there.
I was just wondering who pays for any lost or damaged devices. In one of your cases, that was a
So in St. James School Division, we did indicate that breakage was a big problem, much larger than we anticipated. Before rolling out any of the iPads, we did think a lot about what is this going to look like? If kids do damage or lose their devices, how do they get replaced, and are they on the hook for that replacement? We did shop around a little bit to see if we could find some kind of an insurance policy that we could, buy into so that we could have insurance for the families. And there was really nothing that could be offered through our school division, so we ended up making our own. So essentially, all of the students, grades 6 to 8, who were given divisional iPads, before they actually got their iPad, there was a form that went home. Parents would decide whether or not they wanted to opt in for this caution fee. So the caution fee is a one-time $25 fee, and that would cover the student for the 3 years as it currently stands. So if a student does lose their device or damage their device, if the parents have opted into that caution fee, they would pay $25, they would get a replacement iPad. Now that is taking time because the tech department wants to make sure that the students get back a device that has all the same content that the other device had when it was damaged. So that does require that we have the student's Apple ID and password and lots of other things to be able to put stuff back onto the device. And that has proven to be a little bit problematic. Some parents are astounded that we're asking for passwords. What, do you want my Visa number at the same time? And hearing lots of different things like that. But I think they understand it's in the best interest of the students. So not all parents have opted in with that caution fee. So in the event that a student's device does get damaged or lost, they would be on the hook for the full replacement value.
But how do you work, like, in a division where the technology is mandatory, how do you work with a student who can't afford to pay for a new iPad?
There's 2 different models. So in this case, the iPad is provided, and there's a fee, and it's possible that you should speak for yourselves, but ultimately, you're not going to necessarily make back the money on those losses.
Yeah.
Whereas and that's one way of dealing with that, which is a lease, right? In Louisville, we've gone a different way, and that is we're not leasing any equipment to anyone. We're not managing or controlling anyone's machine. So what we do with parents is we give them a menu. We say, these are the kinds of machines that will work the best at the school. You should have a real keyboard. Tablets are okay. We know that some phones are going to be all right. But we give them a menu, and then they can go choose. Some parents, and we aren't afraid to say that, listen, the warranty you're going to get from this retailer is better than the warranty you'll get from this one. And so we talk to students, and certainly the parents talk to each other about where to buy the computer, so that when the milk gets poured on it, you can go and get a replacement because you're a consumer and you bought a machine and you have that sort of insurance policy because of your return policy. So this is how we're dealing with it there. But sometimes, no matter which model you go with, and the hybrid model as well that's being done where here's a number of machines and you will own it at the end, sometimes things break and it's accidental, it's not malicious. You run into a problem, what would you do if you want to do a lovely case study? What do you do with a teacher who breaks a student's computer?
Ooh. You've never done that, have you?
I happen to know that has occurred. And so, how do you deal with that? And the very quick answer to that is that this is all new ground. There isn't really our policy in place for a lot of it yet, and so people are having to make their best decision in good faith as they move forward. So yeah, sometimes things break, and it's different than breaking a kid's binder.
Having said that about our caution fee that we have in place, because of the volume of breakage that we've seen, we realized very quickly that we picked the wrong case. The cases that we put on all of these student and teacher iPads wasn't nearly as durable as we thought it was going to be. So any family who has already paid their caution fee because they've had a damaged iPad, they're getting that caution fee back. We've actually replaced all of the cases on all the student iPads. So we're kind of back to the drawing board now. So everybody has a clean start. And in the event that there is, because there will be families that can't afford to pay for that caution fee or can't afford a replacement iPad, it's nice that the child does have an iPad that they're provided with, but if they don't have the means to replace it or to pay a caution fee, that student would lose the ability to bring the device home, so they would only have access to the device during school hours. And that's something that some parents chose that for their children at the beginning of the year before their kids ever got the devices. They didn't want the kids bringing the devices home for various reasons. So we do have something in place where kids could leave the device charged and stored at school. So we'll see how many people have to take that option.
Well, one thing about the caution fee, it was they pay it once in grade 6, like let's say a kid starts in grade 6, and they can cash that in once, grade 6, 7, 8, not each year. Over those 3 years, if they break their iPad, they can, because they paid the caution fee, we'll just give them a new iPad. If it was genuinely accidental breakage. But once they've used that caution fee, it's not like I'll pay another $25 and get another iPad. That's not how that works.
We found in our situation that there have been very few breakages. We've been very pleased with that as a school, and I checked with our IT department just late last week, and divisionally they're very pleased. In fact, one of the comments was relative to maintaining the PCs that we have in the schools. It's gone to zero. There's zero maintenance required. The few breakages and the screens, our IT department will send them away to the manufacturer, see if they can get it warranted, and if not, they'll try and fix it themselves. And the cost of fixing a replaced iPad screen is about $60, I think. Or is it the Surface? I can't remember. I think it was the iPads, so we've had a couple. And the families have paid without any question, any problem, because they know they're responsible for that.
All right, I'd say we have time for one more question, so is there any?
I was just wondering whether ManACE, do you have certified Apple technicians on staff to make quick assessments for warranty issues and things like that?
No.
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 So that's all has to be done out of town?
Yeah. Some of the kids think they are, but really they're not.
Right. Interestingly enough, we actually do have a certified Apple technician. He was replacing glass on some damaged iPads, but we were finding that it wasn't perfect. There were some issues where there were some spots on the screen that weren't working very well, or just some little glitches. So even though he can diagnose and know if it's covered by warranty, he's no longer doing the glass replacement. We're getting that done officially through Apple, for what it's worth.
It looks like there's a question at the back.
I did not agree with you. Is it okay to have more questions, all right?
Yeah.
Thank you all, first of all, for presenting. It was really great, really informative, I really enjoyed what you said. I had a few more, and I recognize our discussions have become much more pragmatic in the last few questions. So I just wanted to bring in something slightly more theoretical and see what you thought of it. Because I was thinking about it, I'm sorry, the gentleman with the blue shirt, I'm not sure what you mean.
Darren?
Darren?
Yeah.
What you said, which is the idea, something like the idea that every student will be doing the same thing at the same time is what I'm doing now with digital devices. You said something like, you can't expect all students in class to do
Yeah, we
that.
can't expect all our classes to run that way. Yes.
Right. So what I was thinking is, if you were a Martian, or say from Europa, one of the moons of Jupiter, and you have to come down with your spaceship and look to the window, I was positive that Martian would say precisely that they were all doing the same thing at the same time. They were having different thoughts, but if the Martian were to describe, or the European were to describe what they're doing, they're all sitting like this, looking at the screen, twiddling their thumbs, and apparently the screen changes. And it seems like they're having some sort of interaction with it. So if that's the case, and we take that piece of information with another piece of information, which is that student in grade 4, or I'm not sure what it is you said, that your division gets an iPod or something in grade 4, 8 or something like that. I can't remember what you said. If they're looking at this little screen, all their school lives, from say grade 4 until grade 12, they're looking at that screen much more than they're looking at the adult in their lives, their teachers, their parents. They're looking at the screen much more than the outdoors. They're interacting with that screen primarily. That's the most important interaction in their lives. Besides the problem about building brand loyalty, you're walking advertisement for Apple, right? Because think of what's going to happen. You're a Navy school division. Are the school divisions going to follow you? Other ones in Canada, North America are going to follow you. So besides that whole idea of basically serving as an advertisement for a large corporation, for me, the big question is, what happens when large corporations become, in a sense, the purveyors of information to the child in school who is supposed to be under the jurisdiction and guidance and protection of the state? So just a few things to think about. I wasn't sure if you've any ideas to bounce back. I'm not, of course, being critical of your program. These are concerns that have been raised, what I'm going to say.
So just a couple of quick replies. One, you should visit one of our classrooms. It doesn't look at all like you described. The decision that we make for instruction in our school division has been different for our K to 5, 6 to 8, and 9 to 12 classrooms. And so that has nothing to do with whatever corporation we choose. We choose a device based upon how well it can perform the tasks needed to assist student learning.
I thought they were all apples. I thought you said it was an Apple-based program.
No,
Okay.
and there are a lot of iPads. In the high schools, it's the kids have whatever they got. Some of them do have Apple devices. Some of them have Android devices. Some of them have BlackBerry devices. Some of them have Windows devices, etc.
My point remains, of course, that it's now, again, if you think about what we're actually doing, we're gazing at a screen with the label of this corporation, and we're thinking about the information. We come to know information is coming through this device, as opposed to information coming through other ways.
So two things, and I'm happy to continue the conversation afterwards. But two things, like Andy pointed out in our presentation, it's not all iPads all the time. There are other things going on in the classroom. The technology is there to support learning. Technology really should be like oxygen. It should be omnipresent, invisible, and necessary. And we only reach for it when it's appropriate to use it. The second comment I would make has just escaped me. But I'm happy to continue the conversation with you afterwards. It's not, visit, come see. It doesn't look how you describe. Oh, yeah, sorry. This was the thought I had. It's like we're not really concerned with the stuff that goes into the iPads. What we're interested in is the stuff that comes out of the iPads. The iPad is like a learning studio. It's a mobile, and all these mobile devices, it's a mobile way to capture audio, images, video, and text. In what ways can a learner capture these kinds of media to demonstrate what they've learned and turn around and teach what they've learned to others, while at the same time making a contribution to the global knowledge commons? Because they're publishing it in online spaces and accessible for people around the world. That becomes a little bit more interesting than just people staring at screens. So we're much more curious about the stuff that comes out of them than the stuff that goes into them.
I would agree, and I think that's part of our approach as well with regards to having student choice. Our intent is not to have students utilizing the same device in the same way, but working together. So the student with an iPad is working with the student with a laptop, is working with the student with a Nexus tablet, and they're working on the strengths and hopefully overcoming the weaknesses of the device they have, working collaboratively and producing information rather than consuming it.
I guess to answer the question a little bit would be to say that the medium that we use for instruction or learning or knowledge. So you're coming here hoping to learn something together today. So there is always a medium, and right now we're using the air in our voices and our faces, as you say, and that's one way of doing it. Paper's another, books. People were concerned that books would be a problem for learning because people wouldn't memorize anymore. And people were concerned about screens and television, that it would lower attention span, and perhaps it has in some ways. And people always are concerned about the medium, the thing between the you and me of learning. And that is a very important concern that needs to be addressed. However, if you do not stay with the dominant medium of one's culture, as you're dealing with the learning, the teaching and the learning, the knowing, then you become out of step with your culture as well. And what we're doing here is rich. Would you like to measure this in gigabytes or terabytes of information? We could. We could. Maybe someday we'll get there. But right now we're scratching on a cave wall. It's brand new, and we're barely learning. And as it gets better, I think that we will perhaps be able to deal with richer media in between learners and teachers.
And, I don't know if it'll be the final comment, but do visit a classroom, because really, the conversations that I have with my students, I call them my kids, but my students face-to-face, is much more dynamic, and I think useful and growing. Does that mean it's really open?
Somebody,
Your eyes. than when I started, and I won't use the word old, but formally, a teaching practice would be when I started teaching and I was teaching all technology. Okay, everybody, press the Alt key, and, you know, that was my classroom world, and okay, stop, we gotta wait for these guys, stop, we gotta wait. And now it's so dynamic that it's not a wheelie chair, it's running shoes, it's almost wheelie shoes. And the conversations I have with my kids aren't, what are the dates that the Riel Rebellion happened? It's, what was he thinking? Why did he come back to help these people? And to me, in the couple of years I've been teaching, those conversations are much more meaningful. And in terms of the citizenship piece of what the kids are consuming and staying with that current media, to me, the digital footprint that kids are leaving in those conversations about responsibility online are almost sadly the conversations when I was growing up that my parents didn't want to have with me about drugs and sex. Parents aren't comfortable having these conversations with kids. I don't think it's totally our responsibility. I'd love to find a way. I'd like to talk more about your model, about involving the parents in that. But if we're not having kids see examples of how to properly use this stuff, and it's the dirty little secret that's in their hoodie pocket or their locker or wherever, we're doing them a disservice, and we're not growing with them, I think, too.
And if you do come see a class, come see our outdoor ed class and how they use technology.
I'd be interested, and I've seen lots of classes. But I guess the main point is, I felt some concern in not hearing the medium itself being addressed. And if that's a concern that's actually in your minds every moment that they're being used, fantastic. But my experience has been these are such powerful, some of the old film critics would call it plastic media, that they become so engrossing that we actually forget that we're using them. And that there becomes a bit of a problem, because what it means is we end up being susceptible to the powers of persuasion that can happen at a really unconscious level. And of course, in that area, I refer to the research that's being done on brain shape, especially in adolescence, and how it's changing now with some of the young learners who are using primarily screen technologies.
So on behalf of faculty of education and everyone in here, I'd really like to thank all of you for coming. Very well. And as well, we'd like to thank Sean for filming from Where's the Video. And also, you're very welcome. And we'd also like to thank Manitoba Association of Computing Educators, and we'd really like to thank Mike for organizing this and having it here for us. And I know a lot of us feel really, we learned a lot, and it's a really big topic in today, and as future educators, it's something that we really need to concern ourselves with, and I think that this is a really great start for a lot of us, and a lot of us are really interested in this, so I think that we get it from it. Thank you.
Thank you.
I would also like to just quickly thank the dean and the faculty for allowing us to have this event as well. Without their support, this wouldn't have been possible.
Thank you. Thank you for all that.